Hi, everyone. My name is Lauren Sampson, and I'm a staff attorney at Lawyers for Civil Rights.
I'm Jake Lebovic. I am the Community Outreach Paralegal at Lawyers for Civil Rights.
Thank you all for joining us for our Legal Issues Census webinar. For those of you who are just joining, the webinar is being recorded, and that link will be made available to all participants. We are also going to be sharing the slides from this, so don't have to worry about taking notes. I also want to emphasize that throughout this presentation, you will be muted, but you should feel free to submit questions to us through the Q&A function via Zoom. Jake and I will see that pop up on the screen, and then we can answer your questions in real time. Anything that we can't answer, we'll follow up with you directly. And the last thing I'll stress is that in general, we're providing legal advice that covers a couple of broad topics, but if there are particular issues that come up, we are more than happy to give one-on-one advice, to speak directly with individuals, or to deal with things as they come up. So please feel free to contact us either at our personal emails or phone numbers or using our census hotline, because we'll be providing advice, technical and legal, for the duration of the census period.
So we'll get started. So we are Lawyers for Civil Rights. We are an organization that advocates on behalf of immigrants and communities of color on a wide range of civil rights issues. And just as important as all of those issues is our census advocacy, because of the funding and the representation that's at stake for the communities that we serve. So you can break down what our census work looks like into three categories. We do broader systemic advocacy, and that looked like the amicus brief that we submitted to the Supreme Court when the issue of the inclusion of a citizenship question on the census was an issue. We advocated on behalf of expanding language access so that the census would be available in languages beyond the 12 that are being offered. We particularly worked with CMAA and the Cambodian American community to get the census offered in Khmer. And we also will continue our census advocacy after the census count is complete at the end of July. We'll be trying to make sure that the census data is used equitably for the redistricting process after. I'm seeing that we have a question about interpretation in Spanish. We can offer that.
Yeah, so are you looking for, if you're looking for the documents to be translated in Spanish, we'll be circulating those after the fact. If you're looking for live interpretation in Spanish, we can have Jake translate in real time. If you just let us know if you're looking for our comments to be translated or if you're looking for the documents to be translated. We can, of course, do both. Just let us know. But I would keep going while we wait.
Okay, so we also are offering technical assistance. We have a census hotline that is available. You can see the number in the palm card to the right, and we'll be featuring that at the end of this as well. Our census hotline is bilingual in English and Spanish. Anyone can call with any questions related to the census or specific legal questions. We have the palm card as well that we printed in English and Spanish, and we are happy to send that out to you or to your organization if you would like. We're also offering community trainings just on general issues related to the census and any legal trainings such as this one, and we are willing to go all over the state to offer that. We also will be offering individual representation to anyone in the extremely unlikely event that the Census Bureau misuses anyone's personal information. So like I said, we don't expect that to happen, but if there is a breach of information, we are offering direct representation for that.
So before we move on, just to double check, would anyone require translation of our comments for this webinar into Spanish? Do you want to ask that in Spanish?
¿Alguien quiere que yo traduzco este seminario web en español?
And if so, just let us know using the Q&A function.
Y por favor avísenos en el función de preguntar y contestar. ¿Sí? Okay.
Okay, so I'll keep going in English and Jake will translate into Spanish. So this is our agenda for today's talk. We're going to talk about the citizenship question, the executive order on collecting citizenship information, confidentiality protections, redistricting, working for the census, and best practices for community members.
Entonces hablamos sobre el asunto de la pregunta sobre la ciudadanía, un orden ejecutivo sobre la recolección de información sobre ciudadanía, protección sobre confidencialidad, el proceso de eliminar distritos de votación, trabajando para el censo y prácticas para miembros de la comunidad.
The citizenship question. Many of you might recognize yourselves in this photo. It was taken at a press conference on the steps of the State House right after the Supreme Court decision came out in favor of advocates like us, like the ACLU, like Mass Voter Table, like the Chinese Progressive Association, celebrating the Supreme Court's decision not to permit a citizenship question on the census.
Y se puede ver, foto es tiene algunos de nuestros miembros en la comunidad y en ese momento estábamos tratando de abogar para la exclusión de la pregunta sobre la ciudadanía.
The backstory of the citizenship question is that the Trump administration had suggested including, for the first time since 1950, a question asking about citizenship on the 2020 census. The administration claimed the question was necessary to enforce the Voting Rights Act. The case was challenged, the decision by the administration was challenged by a number of different states, political organizations, social organizations, and eventually made its way to the Supreme Court. In a very narrow 5-4 decision, the Supreme Court held that while the administration may be permitted, and other administrations may in the future be permitted to ask about citizenship, in this particular case, the administration could not include the question because the rationale they had offered, i.e. the protection of the Voting Rights Act, was pretextual. Specifically, Chief Justice Roberts noted, as said here, that if judicial review, that is, if the court's review of executive action is supposed to be more than empty, it must demand something better than the explanation the administration offered in this case. So, as a result, the administration abandoned its efforts to include a citizenship question on the 2020 census, and there will be no question about immigration status or citizenship in the decennial census.
Entonces, antes había una cuestión de la inclusión de una pregunta sobre la ciudadanía y la administración de Trump intentó incluir esta pregunta y su razón por incluirlo fue proteger los derechos de las personas. Y este caso fue a la Corte Suprema de los Estados Unidos y básicamente la decisión fue que la administración no dio una razón suficiente para incluir esta pregunta y la administración no tenía tiempo para regresar y proveer una razón mejor. Entonces, ahora no hay una pregunta sobre la ciudadanía en el censo.
Importantly, there are other censuses that do ask about immigration status and or citizenship, and it's very important to differentiate so that community members are not confused. For example, the American Community Survey, which is also distributed by the Census Bureau, does ask about citizenship. This is a survey that is not attempting to do a total enumeration, but instead operates via sampling and then extrapolates out to create a picture of the country. This census looks very different. It's much larger, it's much longer. So just to ensure that community members are not confused if they see something like the ACS. The same is true of local censuses. For example, the city of Somerville asks about respondents' nationality in their local census. Finally, the test censuses that were circulated in 2019 prior to the Supreme Court decision, about 500,000, do include a citizenship question. However, these are test censuses. Individuals should not feel beholden to fill them out. And they do not in any way mean that the present decennial census will include any question about citizenship. So just to ensure that community members are not confused.
Es importante notar que hay una diferencia entre el censo de 2020 y la encuesta sobre la encuesta de la comunidad estadounidense. El censo de 2020 no tiene una pregunta sobre la ciudadanía y este censo, esta encuesta solo tiene 10 preguntas y eso es lo más importante para difundir fondos y en cuanto a la representación política de nuestras comunidades. La encuesta sobre la comunidad estadounidense es una encuesta más larga y es con más frecuencia. Este censo también es importante, pero no tiene las mismas consecuencias como el censo de 2020 y sí tiene una pregunta sobre la ciudadanía. También es importante notar que hay censos de prueba que había tomado lugar antes, pero estos no tienen la misma importancia y no tiene que completar ese censo.
The executive order on collecting citizenship information. Individuals might remember that after announcing that the administration would abandon its efforts to pursue a citizenship question on the 2020 census, the president signed an executive order on collecting citizenship information in the Rose Garden. The executive order instructs all federal and state administrative agencies to make citizenship data available to the Census Bureau. And that's really important. It is a one-way information sharing system. So the Census Bureau is not giving information to federal and state agencies. It is only going one way, in part because of Title 13, which we'll cover in a little bit. The stated aim of the administration, as laid out in the executive order, is to better inform immigration and public benefits policy and to provide states with what's known as the citizen voting age population, the CVAP, which states can use for internal redistricting.
Bueno, la administración del Trump básicamente tiene este orden para recopilar datos sobre la ciudadanía. Y este orden dice que todas las administraciones o las agencias administrativas en los estados y federales tienen que proveer o proporcionar datos sobre la ciudadanía con el Departamento del Censo. Pero es importante notar que solo estas organizaciones pueden compartir datos sobre la ciudadanía con el Departamento del Censo. El Departamento del Censo no puede compartir su información con esas agencias. Disculpe. Y sobre el último punto, su razón principal por tener ese orden, básicamente lo que ellos dicen es que es para informar la política de inmigración y de beneficios públicos. También dicen que es una manera de proporcionar a los estados con datos sobre la ciudadanía para el proceso de crear distritos de votación.
The major takeaway should be that 1, there is no direct impact on Census 2020, and 2, the executive order is not a reason to panic. So kind of going through those reasons. Number 1, the Census Bureau already has a lot of access to citizenship data in a couple of ways. One is through the American Community Survey, which I discussed earlier. The second is that for individuals who don't fill out the census, the Bureau is already enabled to look at other records, for example, Social Security or tax filings or other kinds of documents to try and put together this complete picture. So this is not something novel. The other thing to note is that citizenship data is scattered, incomplete, and dynamic. It's very difficult to actually share accurate information. And it's one reason that states tend not to use citizenship information drawn from things like the ACS because it's not seen to be fully accurate. Unsurprisingly, of course, an organization like DHS, the Department of Homeland Security, might have information about individuals who've applied for different kinds of immigration relief, but they don't have information about citizens or about folks who are undocumented. The Social Security Administration may have information about individuals with Social Security numbers, but not necessarily those without, for example, not children. The other thing to note in terms of the impact on redistricting is that there's no indication that Massachusetts would use the citizen voting age population, i.e. the number of US citizens over the age of 18, when drawing internal boundaries for redistricting for state and local legislative districts. Massachusetts has not used that in the past, and there's no indication Massachusetts would use this in the future. While a number of states have indicated their interest in doing so, for example, Tennessee, Texas, Massachusetts has not indicated anything of the kind, and there's no reason to believe right now that they would use CVAP as opposed to the total population when drawing districts. The final thing to note is that this executive order is being challenged in the District of Maryland by the Mexican American Legal Defense Fund, as well as Asian Americans Advancing Justice. That case is still ongoing, and so it's possible the executive order might be thwarted in some other legal fashion by this case. To note, in fact, the complaint actually highlights the degree to which the citizenship information produced by these different agencies is incomplete and scattered and dynamic and doesn't really accurately reflect the number of citizens, the number of immigrants, where exactly they live, and emphasizes that this data should not really be relied on when it comes to drawing districts. And then finally, the actual final point is that there's no impact on how this data can be used for things like immigration or criminal enforcement. This is a one-way information sharing system. The Bureau is not permitted to give any of its data to any other agency or to use it for any purpose other than the statistical enumeration.
Lo más importante saber sobre este orden ejecutivo es que no va a tener un impacto en el censo de 2020. Y eso es por algunas razones. El Departamento del Censo ya tiene información sobre la ciudadanía a través de la encuesta estadounidense de la comunidad, y sus esfuerzos para recopilar más datos sobre la ciudadanía probablemente no van a resultar en más información, porque los datos sobre ciudadanía no son completos, no son no hay un lugar central que tiene toda esa información. Es difícil tener y compartir toda esa información porque el estatus migratorio siempre está cambiando. Es un dato dinámico y también es incompleto. Realmente solo esos departamentos tienen información sobre aplicaciones para cambiar estatus. Ellos no saben necesariamente si hay personas que son indocumentados. Los estados tienen la opción de usar datos sobre ciudadanía para crear distritos de votación, o si ellos también pueden usar los números de la población total. Y hay un caso en el corte que vamos a discutir más que tiene información sobre cuál los estados pueden usar. También hay una demanda en las cortes que fue demandado por MALDEF, Mexican American Legal Defense and Education Fund, and Asian Americans Advancing Justice. Este caso todavía está pendiente en el distrito de Maryland. Datos no pueden ser usados. No pueden inmigración.
We highlight this quote just to show that there is no need to panic over the executive order. You might note the quote here that describes how legal experts widely dismiss the order as a pointless fig leaf. There is no need to panic over the executive order that may ultimately be enjoined by a court and that ultimately will not be able to give the Census Bureau as much information as it thinks it might need to collect.
Solo tenemos esta cita para decir que, bueno, es en el periódico de New Yorker, y dice que expertos legales dicen que este orden ejecutivo no es muy importante, y básicamente quisiéramos decir que ustedes no deben preocuparse sobre este orden ejecutivo.
Moving on to the confidentiality protections of federal law for the census.
Y ahora vamos a hablar sobre protecciones sobre la confidencialidad del censo.
Census responses are protected by Title 13, a federal law that ensures the confidentiality of individual responses to the census. Specifically, census data may only be used for statistical purposes. It cannot be used to identify any individual. What that means in practice is that one cannot look at census data to identify where, for example, I live. They might only look at census data to see that there are people who maybe fit my description living in a place like Somerville, Massachusetts. But you cannot use census data to identify any one person. 2, the Census Bureau may not share individual responses with anyone outside of the Bureau. That includes law enforcement agencies at the state, local, and federal level, immigration officers, landlords, employers, just about anyone. Responses can also not be used to the detriment of any individual. They may not be introduced in a court of law as evidence, for example. And this applies to all Census Bureau employees at every level, ranging from the seasonal enumerators to the long-term employees. They must swear an oath when they work for the census that forbids them from sharing individual responses. If they violate this oath, they can face a fine of $250,000 and or up to 5 years in prison.
Bueno, hay una ley federal que se llama Título 13 que tiene todas las protecciones de confidencialidad para sus respuestas al censo. Y es lo que este ley dice es que el censo es para propósitos estadísticos y no puede ser usado por otra razón. Los datos del censo no pueden ser compartidos con la policía, con oficiales de inmigración, con dueños, con empleados, y no pueden ser compartidos en una manera que identificarse a una individual. También todos los trabajadores del censo tienen o hacen un juramento que dicen que no pueden compartir información con nadie y si es violado, ellos tienen que pagar una multa de 250,000 o pueden ir al cárcel por al menos 5 años.
There are multiple examples of both the courts and Congress affirming the importance of census confidentiality. One of the most striking examples is in the years after Japanese American internment, Congress passed a law prohibiting census employees from sharing data to ensure that what happened during the 1940 census, when data on Japanese Americans was shared for the purposes of internment, cannot happen again. The Census Bureau also created additional protections following 9/11 when there were requests from law enforcement agencies for demographic data on Arab Americans. Importantly, there were not requests made, nor were requests delivered on for individual level data. It was purely at the community level. It was aggregated, did not identify anyone by name. Higher levels of clearance are now required for information for sensitive populations, and the Bureau also created the role of the Chief Privacy Officer who oversees these requests. Finally, in a Supreme Court case, the US Supreme Court held that the Freedom of Information Act could not be used to access census data, even if it was going to be used for statistical purposes by municipalities. The Supreme Court reaffirmed Title 13's confidentiality protections, noting that the desire by Congress that people respond honestly, truthfully, and accurately to the census trumps the desire for localities to act.
Había una ley, el ley que tenemos en este momento que protege a sus respuestas al censo, fue creado después de los japoneses americanos fueron detenidos en el año 1940, pero después de ese incidente, el gobierno y el Congreso creó leyes más estrictas para proteger las respuestas individuales al censo. También después del 9/11, el Departamento del Censo compartió información sobre americanos árabes al nivel vecindario. Pero eso fue legal porque no compartió información sobre individuales, solo fue al nivel del vecindario y al nivel agregado. Pero después de abogacía por parte de grupos de derechos civiles, ahora el Departamento del Censo tiene que recibir la permisión de personas más altas en el gobierno para compartir información sobre poblaciones sensitivas. Y eso significa poblaciones como minorías, inmigrantes o comunidades de color. También en el año 1980, algunas ciudades intentó acceder información sobre los datos del censo al nivel individual porque ellos pensaron que el gobierno o que había un undercount, que no contaron a todas las personas. Entonces, ese caso fue al Corte Suprema y la Corte Suprema afirmó la ley en título 13 que dice que en ningún caso el gobierno no puede, o el Departamento del Censo no puede compartir respuestas individuales al censo porque esto va a romper la confidencialidad, el fe que la comunidad tiene en el censo. Y ese caso fue Baldridge v. Shapiro.
So another aspect we wanted to address was during previous censuses, it is our understanding that ICE, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, reached an informal agreement with the Census Bureau not to conduct immigration enforcement during census outreach events. It is our understanding that no such agreement has been reached for Census 2020, and not an informal agreement, not an unwritten agreement, nothing of the kind. So we want to note, however, that ICE's general practice remains to refrain from engaging in immigration enforcement at sensitive locations. This is internal guidance that ICE has reaffirmed multiple times. Sensitive locations include places like schools, medical treatment centers, houses of worship, or during religious or civil ceremonies, things like weddings, funerals, etc. We note this to emphasize that even if there isn't an explicit memorandum of understanding in place, akin to those, for example, that the Department of Labor enters into with ICE during worksite investigations into unsafe labor practices, that doesn't mean that there aren't still protections in place to ensure that ICE doesn't come to sensitive locations like schools or churches. We recommend, as a result, that if community members are concerned about this, they consider holding census events at these kinds of sensitive locations to have that extra level of protection for community members who might be concerned about immigration enforcement.
Durante censos en años antes, ICE y el Departamento del Censo tenían un acuerdo informal que dicen que ICE no iban a conducir sus actividades de enforcement de inmigración durante los eventos del censo. Pero sabemos que en ese momento no hay un acuerdo así. Pero la práctica general del ICE es no conducir sus actividades de enforcement de inmigración en locaciones sensitivas como escuelas, hospitales, lugares de rezar y en ceremonias civiles o religiosas. Entonces, nosotros recomendamos que grupos en la comunidad tengan sus eventos del censo en estas locaciones sensitivas para prevenir una posibilidad así.
So we're now going to turn to issues surrounding redistricting.
Vamos a hablar en este momento sobre el proceso de crear distritos de votación.
So redistricting is one of the uses of census data to redraw congressional districts, state and local legislative districts in order to ensure proportional representation. The issue for our purposes is what set of data states should use for legislative redistricting, which of course has massive implications for the balance of political power.
Ahora vamos a hablar sobre la diferencia entre el uso sobre dos prácticas para crear distritos de votación. Hay un ejemplo, una manera de usar datos sobre la ciudadanía y otro para usar la población entera.
So the two possible populations that we typically talk about are the citizen voting age population, known as CVAP, or the total population, which just includes everyone. While it's settled that the total population should be used for congressional districts, i.e. members of the House of Representatives, and accordingly votes in the Electoral College, the door is still open for states to use the other forms for internal districts, for state and legislative local districts. A number of states have constitutional provisions of their own that exclude or include certain populations. For example, in Hawaii, individuals living and working in Hawaii redistricting in the past.
Hay una diferencia entre usar datos sobre la ciudadanía y datos de la población total. Y tienen implicaciones políticas. Creemos que hay posibilidades de empujar el equilibrio de poder a favor de un partido si es creado a través de usando datos sobre la ciudadanía o por la población total.
The 2016 case Evanwell v. Abbott, in a decision by Justice Ginsburg, affirmed that states can use total population to draw their internal districts, but left open the question of whether they can use other metrics, specifically the citizen voting age population, which some states, places like Texas and Tennessee and the like, have indicated an interest in doing. It is one of the likely motivations behind the administration seeking citizenship data through the executive order, as that would allow states to draw internal districts that did not include immigrants or children, essentially anyone, a non-citizen under the age of 18. But as we said, this would not apply to congressional districts, and we have no reason to believe that that would happen in Massachusetts. And if it did, there would be an immediate legal challenge by organizations like Lawyers for Civil Rights on the grounds that this violated a number of different legal provisions.
En el caso en 2016 se llama Evanwell versus Abbott. La Corte Suprema decidió que los estados tienen la habilidad de decidir cuál tipo de datos se usa para crear distritos de votación. Históricamente, todos los estados han usado los números de la población entera para crear sus distritos de votación. Y Massachusetts es uno de los estados, pero si hay desafíos o hay estados como Massachusetts que no usan los datos de la población entera, nosotros vamos a demandarlos y nosotros vamos a proteger a las poblaciones que van a sufrir, que podrían sufrir si usan los datos sobre la ciudadanía en vez de la población entera.
So similar to the issue of what happens after the census is sometimes a process known as adjustment. This is a mechanism whereby the Census Bureau can correct for a census undercount by conducting, for example, a post-enumeration survey sample and then comparing that with the actual count and then adjusting the numbers accordingly, just in case anyone was missed. It is typically a way to ensure that historically undercounted groups, for example, immigrants and communities of color, are counted. It should be noted that there is a lot of discretion vested in the Secretary of Commerce, as affirmed by a 1996 Supreme Court case, in which the Secretary of Commerce actually overruled the decision of individuals working under him and decided not to conduct a post-enumeration survey because he was concerned that even if the total number of individuals in the country was not as accurate as it could have been, relying on adjustment would mean that the smaller counts for states or localities or municipalities or blocks would be less accurate. And the Supreme Court affirmed that the Secretary of Commerce has wide discretion as bestowed by Congress to conduct the census, and that those decisions need to bear only a reasonable relationship to the accomplishment of the actual enumeration of the population. And that's important because it shows that there's no heightened standard of scrutiny, even though this would impact the rights of people to vote, the rights of communities of color. Heightened scrutiny is not applied to these kinds of decisions. It must bear only a reasonable relationship, which makes it very difficult to argue that the secretary has abused his or her discretion in these cases.
Hay un proceso de corregir si no todos son contados por el censo, y ese proceso es ajustar los números de personas no contados. Y el proceso de hacer eso es por una encuesta después del censo para contar a todos los que no fueron contados. Y eso es una manera de asegurar que los grupos que históricamente no son contados, y eso es como inmigrantes y comunidades de color. En un caso antes, la Corte Suprema, Wisconsin versus City of New York, la Corte decidió que el Departamento del Censo o el Departamento de Comercio tiene la capacidad para determinar si los números son ajustados o no. Y en este momento sabemos que todavía tiene esa capacidad para decidir.
So we're now going to turn to something entirely different, rights, responsibilities, and issues surrounding working for the census.
Y ahora vamos a cambiar a hablar sobre trabajando para el censo.
So first and foremost, if you are a non-citizen, you are permitted to work for the census, though a number of restrictions apply. You must be eligible to work in the United States, i.e., if you are undocumented, you will not be able to work for the Census Bureau. First preference continues to go to U.S. citizens, and it is most likely that the Bureau will turn to hiring immigrants and non-citizens if they possess needed language skills. So, for example, if you are a Khmer speaker and the census is hiring enumerators in places like Lowell.
Históricamente, el censo ha encontrado a personas que no son ciudadanos, pero hasta recientemente el censo no lo hace, pero por parte de nuestra abogacía, ahora el censo sí va a contratar a personas que no son ciudadanos para el censo, pero esto es solo si esas personas son elegibles para trabajar en los Estados Unidos. Entonces, personas indocumentadas desafortunadamente no pueden trabajar para el Departamento del Censo, solo personas con autorización para trabajar en este país. Preferencia primera va a ciudadanos para estas posiciones, pero personas que no son ciudadanos, es más probable que sean contratados si ellos tienen capacidades de idioma que son necesitados.
So we wanted to make sure we covered the impact of U.S. Census income on public benefits. If you earn income working as a census enumerator, this will not count for certain benefits. For example, if you have any kind of federal public housing, like a Section 8 voucher, or you live in Section 8 public housing, if you are LIHEAP or that's permitted. So anyone who has an EAD, an unrestricted EAD, would be fine. So if you have work authorization of any kind, that's permissible. If you're an asylum seeker, you're a refugee, you're a legal permanent resident, you have TPS, or a work permit, a temporary work permit, while you are applying for another kind of immigration relief is perfectly acceptable. Thank you for asking that question. That's an important clarification.
Y esa pregunta, si personas que son indocumentados pueden trabajar para el censo, si tienen un permiso de trabajar, sí. Em, no importa si cuál su estatus sea, si tienen un permiso para trabajar en los Estados Unidos, pueden trabajar para el censo. Sí. Y ahora hablamos sobre cómo trabajando para el censo afecta a beneficios públicos y sabemos que para la mayoría de programas su ingreso del censo no va a afectar su habilidad de recibir esos beneficios. Y eso incluso programas de vivienda como Section 8 y programas estatales. Eso también incluso asistencia de pagar para las luces y electricidad, gas, la IHEAP y asistencia de emergencia para personas en shelter. También incluso programas de alimentos como SNAP o cupones de comida y el Healthy Incentives Program.
And Jake, I believe for some of these, you still have to report your census income. It might just not be countable. Is that right?
Yeah, so we say that for all programs, you should be reporting any temporary income from the census to the agencies.
It just won't necessarily be used to mean that you aren't still eligible to receive the benefits, though you should still report it.
Yes. Y la pregunta es si debe decir su ingreso o reportar su ingreso a las agencias y la respuesta es sí. Aún su ingreso no va a impactar sus beneficios, debe reportar su ingreso a las agencias que administran los beneficios.
We also wanted to talk about a couple of other benefits involving income. So earned working for the census will not count for certain means tested benefits, for example, cash assistance programs that are run through the state, TAFDC for families with children, EAEDC for people with disabilities or over the age of 65. For health programs like Mass Health, census earnings will not count as income for people who are over the age of 65 or who receive other benefits like SSI, EAEDC, or TAFTC.
Y para otros programas en que su ingreso del censo no cuenta sus beneficios, eso incluso en programas de dinero como TFTC para familias con niños, EAEDC para personas con discapacidades o que son mayores de 65. También programas de salud. Su ingreso del censo no va a contar como en contra de su Mass Health si es una persona que es mayor de 65 o si reciba TFTC, AEDC o SSI.
And we, along with MLRI, have produced a quick flip back chart that shows all of the different benefits that we're talking about here and the different levels of eligibility and countability. Those are going to be translated into Spanish and they will be widely distributed and handed out. I think they are currently available on our website, but right now just in English, they will be translated into Spanish. If you have specific questions about specific benefits, please feel free to reach out to us. We're always happy to answer individual questions as well.
Y nosotros creamos un infographic con información sobre cómo ingreso del censo va a impactar beneficios públicos. Ahora este documento está en nuestro sitio de web y lo vamos a traducir a español y podemos compartir ese documento con los que la quieran.
So kind of wrapping up here, we wanted to talk about a couple of different best practices for community members as well as for individuals who are helping community members fill out the census. Title 13 does go both ways. So Title 13 does also include legal requirements for individuals filling out the census. The most important ones are that it is illegal to provide false answers, just like completing any government form. Community members should fill out the census accurately and honestly. And that includes, for example, not lying about one's address, not putting down a false name, nothing like that. You must also technically answer all questions. It is our understanding, based on many conversations with the Bureau and many of their public statements, that really up until the point at which an individual skips about 3 or 4 questions, they shouldn't expect any follow-up. We do recommend, however, that individuals try to fill out all the questions if possible, both to ensure that we have complete and accurate information, but also to just protect against the possibility of any kind of follow-up. We also wanted to talk about what the obligations of organizations and community members are when actually encouraging folks to fill out the census. Be wary of encouraging individuals to skip questions or leave questions blank. We think this is probably less of an issue now that there's no citizenship question, but because of the provisions of Title 13, there is a small but nonetheless present chance that if your actions could be construed as advocating for individuals to not comply with Title 13 by, for example, skipping questions or not fully completing the census, that you could jeopardize, for example, your 501c3 status. So we really encourage folks to leave the decision up to the individual census respondent to say, you know, I'm providing you with all the information you need. I'm letting you know the lay of the land and the status of the law. Make the decision that makes the most sense for you and your family. From a practical perspective, there have been no prosecutions since 1970. The Census Bureau itself is very clear that it's not a prosecuting or enforcement agency and prefers to secure maximum compliance through voluntary action. As a couple other things to note, sort of more practically, treat completing the census like helping someone vote with an absentee ballot. Don't fill it out for them, but if need be, assist them, make sure they're present, help them answer the questions. Do not print out the census for community members and then try to mail it in. The Bureau has no means of collecting or processing that. If you are going to create a space where people can fill out the census, make sure you're protecting confidentiality, for example, by having dividers or being sure that after an individual completes the census online, that their information is no longer on the screen for the next person. And then finally, be really clear about your role when engaged in grassroots efforts. If you're going to go out door knocking, for example, you want to be really sure that there's no possibility you could be mistaken for a census enumerator. That itself is also penalized under Title 13, pretending to be a census worker. And even though, of course, I'm not expecting that anyone would say, yes, I work for the census, we just want to be really cautious and ensure that there's no confusion and that no community member thinks for any reason that someone is representing the Census Bureau when they're not.
Y algunas cosas que son importantes saber para personas completando el censo y para grupos que están abogando para una cuenta completa. Técnicamente es ilegal proporcionar respuestas falsas al censo, ahora que no hay una pregunta sobre la ciudadanía. Eso probablemente no sería un problema tan serio, pero igual entendemos que hay personas que tienen miedo del gobierno federal, que tal vez no quisieran proporcionar información sobre su nombre, su dirección. Igual es ilegal proporcionar respuestas falsas y siempre debe contestar el censo honestamente. También debe contestar a todas las preguntas que pueda. Lo más probable si falta una pregunta es que va a recibir una carta del censo, una llamada o una toca a la puerta para contestar más completamente. Y el Departamento del Censo no es una organización que quisiera castigar a personas, solo quisieran tener una cuenta completa. Para organizaciones, no debe decir a sus miembros que deben faltar una pregunta o lo deja en blanco. Hay consecuencias para el estatus 50163 de su organización con fines de lucro o sin fines de lucro, porque es ilegal faltar a preguntas o mentir en el censo. Si usted o su organización aboga para faltar preguntas, hay consecuencias para esos estatus. También no debe completar el censo por parte de miembros de la comunidad si hay personas con problemas de accesibilidad en cuanto a idioma o capacidad. Usted puede ayudarle a completar el censo si usted está con la persona, pero no puede contestar el censo sin la persona consigo. También no debe imprimir el censo y repartirlo con miembros de la comunidad, el Departamento del Censo no va a aceptar esto. Y es importante que sea claro sobre su rol cuando está en la comunidad. Entendemos que ustedes no quisieran presentarse como miembros o trabajadores del Departamento del Censo, pero quisiera evitar una confusión sobre eso y es importante ser claro sobre quién es la meta de su organización.
Jake, a lot of about the census, fact sheets, palm cards, the graphics that Jake created about census employment. Most of these are in a number of different languages. The palm cards, for example, are in English, Spanish, Mandarin, Haitian Creole, Portuguese, and Khmer. We certainly encourage you to call us with any specific questions, or if you know of something that's going on, maybe in your community or at an organization, or that you've seen the Bureau engaged in that we can address directly. We are certainly, we are here as a resource, a legal and technical resource for all of you and for your community members. And we will continue to do so until the end of enumeration this summer, and then of course into the redistricting process going into 2021.
Y esta es nuestra información de contacto. Siempre nos puede contactar con preguntas. Tenemos una línea de ayuda y hablamos inglés y español. Nos puede llamar con preguntas sobre el censo y con preguntas legales. Y también tenemos un sitio de web con toda nuestra información sobre el censo. Tenemos documentos sobre cómo ingreso del censo va a afectar a beneficios públicos. También tenemos información general sobre el censo. Entonces, visite a nuestro sitio de web, llámenos a la línea de ayuda y siempre podemos ir a su organización para hacer una presentación y dar información sobre el censo.
Wonderful. Thank you, everyone. Please feel free to shoot us any questions that you might have. I see we just got one more right here. Oh, thank you. Thank you very much. If you have any other questions, please just reach out to us. We are, like Jake said, happy to come to your organization to conduct a training, to do clinics, to do workshops, to do whatever we can to both support getting a complete accurate count and also ensuring organizations have the legal and technical information they need to make sure our communities are represented in 2020. Thank you all.
Y nosotros quisiéramos hacer todo para sus organizaciones y sus comunidades para hacer una cuenta completa. Entonces, por favor, contáctenos. Siempre estamos disponibles para ayudarles. Gracias.
Gracias.